So, I want to talk about creepypastas. There isn't really anything going on in the news right now, pop culture wise, so we're just going to have a casual conversation. And today I want to talk about what kind of ruined creepypastas for a while. Creepypastas have been having a renaissance recently because of Friday Night Funkin', and don't worry, we're going to be talking about Friday Night Funkin' soon as well. But that made me remember how relevant creepypastas used to be and what kind of made them start to lose their relevancy. So, when creepypastas first started up, it was just people on web forums talking about stories they made up. They would share it around, no one would really get properly credited. That's why it was called creepypasta, because it's like copy pasta, you just copy paste it. No one was really
Yeah.
trying to become an e-celebrity. No one was really trying to like become big off of these stories, and that's why most of the people who created the most iconic stories don't really get any royalties, and Party City doesn't even have to pay them when they make costumes based off their creations. But that's a whole story for another
Oh,
day.
really?
Um,
Didn't know that.
yeah, basically, if you publish stuff online, it was like free for everyone to use. So, yeah, they kind of screwed themselves on that. But regardless,
Yeah.
um, creepypasta started online, and the first really big creepypasta was Slenderman. And Slenderman was like the one that set the standard for a lot of creepypastas that come. It was usually something that was like somewhat realistic, and it was more of an urban legend vibe. From Slenderman,
Yeah.
we got things like Jeff the Killer, we got things like Tiki
The
Toby, stuff
rake.
like that, The Rake. Like, just your typical scary stories to tell in the dark type of creatures and entities. Those were the standard for a while. Then you started getting what is now called analog horror. Analog horror was where we had things that were like pitched as media. And when it first started out, like the big ones was like 1999 and Candle Cove. Those were like the first big analog horror stories. There was probably more that I don't remember. Happy Appy too. There's probably more that I don't
Happy Pig?
remember. Almost definitely more that I don't remember. What did you say?
Was Happy big?
Oh, I'm saying it was analog horror,
Ah, okay.
but there's probably more. I'm just not remembering it. But with analog horror came someone who decided, hey, I could do this, but instead of making up my own thing, I could just have it be SpongeBob. And
Red
the
Mist.
reason why I say that is because of Red Mist. Red Mist is everyone's favorite creatively bankrupt story. Basically, Red Mist was the thing that popularized hyper-realistic eyes. It was the story that popularized it's just the typical thing until it isn't. It popularized the
Lost
music being
episode.
off, characters crying, the blood dripping down the eyes. Basically, it's the granddaddy of all creepypastas. It's like the common ancestor between what would become the EXE stories of the future. It's patient zero. Red Mist is where it all started to go downhill. And the thing is, Red Mist is not a good story. It talks about
No.
child mutilation. It talks about like really messed up things. Like Red
It's
Mist,
just it's fucking gore for gore and to be shocking.
yeah,
To
it's a
to be
shock
oh, this
story.
is scary.
It's not
It's
really
not
creepy. It's just a shock story. It's trying to offend you. And that's
yeah.
where I think Red Mist fails at, is that it wasn't trying to be creepy. And the fact that like it was like a lost episode that made people like kill themselves and stuff. It's silly. It's silly and ludicrous. It's not creepy. Um,
Yeah.
from Red Mist though, we'd get a ton, and I mean a ton of imitators. You get Dead Bart. You get all of the lost episodes, like all of them. The whole
Ugh.
genre of lost episode is just from Red Mist. And there are so many that just straight up reference Red Mist and then still just do the exact same thing as it. It's like, have you heard of the story Red Mist? Yes, I have. You're ripping it off. Like, there was just so many of them that just straight up plagiarize Red Mist. But Red Mist was just the beginning. The story that would rip off Red Mist and then become even bigger than it and become the biggest scourge on creepypastas would be Sonic.exe. Sonic.exe is a really terrible story written by an equally terrible person. And Sonic.exe uses the hyper-realistic eyes from Red Mist, which now is more associated with EXE because, like, it it's just that much more popular and that much more relevant. Um, it stole the bleeding eyes from Red Mist. It stole a lot of the ideas from Red Mist, and it just cut out the child gore, which good
Was it?
choice, good
Yeah.
choice. But exe, Sonic.exe would end up spawning a whole line of imitator games such as it. And the thing that made EXE unique is that it got a fan game made of it. And that is what started video game horror stories as a whole. I know there were video game creepypastas before this, but the
Like,
EXE line of
and
creepypastas are so easy to do that literally everyone started doing it. Look up
yeah.
your favorite video game character .exe and you will find it. Mario EXE, Kirby EXE, anything you can think of, and there's an EXE. There's even an Undertale EXE. When that already
There
exists, it's
is?
called the Genocide Route. But there is still an Undertale EXE.
I didn't know that.
All
I
EXE
honestly, I figured
stories, all EXE stories are the same. And just like with the Red Mist Lost fucking episode stories, it's the same thing. It's you play the game is normal until it's spooky. That is every fucking that is every EXE story ever.
yeah. It's really dumb. It's typically just a lot of fucking hyper-realistic eyes and blood and shit,
Yeah,
and characters acting in ways that they don't normally act.
yeah. It's it's the most basic shovelware creepypastas you can get. When you want
Yeah.
to write your first creepypasta, chances are it's an EXE. And there's so many EXEs. Even Sonic.exe itself had a bunch of EXE copies. You had Sally.exe. You had, no, it was Sally.jpg, wasn't it? No, what was it? It was
Was it? I
Sally,
thought it was EXE.
no, it wasn't Sally.exe. It was, Sally dot something. I don't remember what it was.
I
You
could have
have the
sworn it was
Sally
EXE.
EXE story. We'll just call it that
Yeah.
because I don't remember the name. And then you have Sonic.avi. You have,
Isn't there Tailstone.exe as well?
yes, even though Tails Doll is before Sonic.exe, there was still a
Yeah.
Tails Doll version of Sonic.exe. And I didn't bring up
Yeah.
Tails Doll because even though Tails Doll is bad, it still fits in with what I said creepypasta should be, as in urban legends that might be true. Because with
Okay,
Tails Doll, with the original Tails Doll, not the fucking versions everyone else remembers, with the original Tails Doll, if I'm remembering right, it was just the urban legend of play Do You Feel the Sunshine backwards while you're in a dark room, and then Tails Doll will appear to get you. It's like Bloody Mary. It's not very original, it's not very creative, but it still fits that motif of being an urban legend. It's
yeah.
something that you can try, something that might make you think it's real for a second. But no one
Yeah.
read Sonic.exe and are over the age of 12 and thought, oh my god, this could be real.
Well, it's just the concept that video game characters are sentient and have their own free will and could murder, like, their fellow game members who I guess don't have sentience, but you're supposed to maybe have sentience. I don't know, it's confusing. One's like fucking, what is it? Pokemon Dead Channel?
Yeah.
Make it really fucking stupid about it.
I think the thing that made me dislike the Lost episodes and the EXEs it's not even really the writing so much, it's the character design. With like Slender Man, you have a completely original character, that being a man with no face with really long arms. With Jeff the Killer, you have an emo kid in a hoodie. With the Rake, you have kind of like Slender Man, but more beast looking. You got original looking characters. You've got Laughing Jack, who's a Jack in the Box clown man. You got so
Yeah.
many different original ideas and creations.
Stylish, yeah.
But then with .exes and lost episodes, it's just character but dead. Character with black eyes and red pupils dripping blood. Character but slightly colored darker. They're recolors. That's all .exes and lost stories are. It's just
Yeah.
recolors. You're lucky if you get anything beyond sharp teeth and bloodshot eyes. Like, it's just really lame. Things like Candle Cove will always step above this. Happy Appy. Fucking,
I mm,
there are so many different stories that at least try to set up their own world and own universe. It doesn't matter if it's bad. It doesn't matter if you think it's bad. It doesn't matter if you think it's corny. Some of these are just made to creep out children, and that's fine. But the thing with the lost episode creepypastas in comparison and the EXEs in comparison is, at least you still have to come up with your own thing. At least you still have to be creative with it. And at least you have the freedom of people not being able to Google it and see if you're fucking lying. Like,
yeah.
you can't Google, did Candle Cove exist? You can't Google, did Happy Appy exist? What would it say? No. like, like when you're a kid and you're just looking this stuff up, like, there's an air of mystery to it because you can't just look it up. But meanwhile, things like Lavender Town Syndrome, you can look up, did this happen? And you can instantly find the answer, which takes away a
Yeah.
lot of the mystery to it. And it was really just a stupid story to begin with, but once you know that it's stupid and fake, it really just kind of takes any mystique it had away from it.
Yeah. It makes it a lot worse when it could have just had like a fucking an urban legend story, which urban legend stories are always more interesting.
Yeah, and I guess now, because we're still talking about why creepypasta sucked, I guess we'll talk about the also bad thing with creepypastas are the rewrites
Oh
and
god.
the sequels. With the rewrites, chances are sometimes it improves the story, like with Jeff the Killer, but other
Eh.
times with Sonic.exe, you took a 30-minute story and you made it a 4-hour long story. With the sequels, it's usually more of the same thing, but slightly different. Like Sonic.exe 2, they still play a very similar game, and the same stuff happens. It's just now a detective is involved instead of Tom.
Yeah.
Like,
It's
with the Laughing
I
Jack sequels, it's still more the same thing. With the Jeff the Killer sequels, it's more the same thing. Like, it's hardly ever that you'll get, like, a unique story with the sequels. The Creepypasta sequels feel more like the Disney sequels, where it's like, we didn't have any idea, but the first thing was big, and I don't know how to write. And you're lucky if the sequel is actually made by the guy who made the original.
usually they're not. It's just fan projects, which to be fair, that's probably why they're worse. Or just really fucking samey because they liked the first one and they want to write off the first one's hype
The
and popularity.
Sally.exe story wasn't made by JC the Hyena. That's why it's
No, but
slightly
he
better
fucking
than fucking Sonic.exe. And I say
yeah, but
slightly
he
better.
made it canon though to
He
his shit.
he made it canon, but the thing is that it's still better. Like, it's still a slightly better story. And I only say better because the bar was set so low. I'm not saying that it's like an amazing story. It's shit. but it's
Yeah.
still
It's
better than
scraping at the bottom
JC's
of the barrel,
story.
but it's still a little better.
Yeah, it's still better than JC's story.
Yeah.
But yeah, usually though, with some characters, it can actually hurt their reputation. Like with Slenderman. The more we knew about Slenderman, the more the mystery was taken away from him. The
Yep.
more that we knew about certain killers, the less mystique they had around them in general. Like, it works when it's an urban legend, and urban legends are at their best when you don't know their entire bio sheet. Like, I
Yeah.
get that
Let
there
it
are
be.
some people who really like lore, but lore doesn't always help.
No, it's like with it just personally for me, it's like with fucking Five Nights at Freddy's. I really liked the first game. There was a lot of mystery behind it and a lot of not completely clear answers. And look at where we are now.
Yeah.
Everything's a lot more confusing and everything's spelled out for you. It's like I don't like this.
To be fair, though, um, Five Nights at Freddy's is partially, it has creepypasta culture to credit because
Oh, I
it
know.
is like based off of Chuck E. Cheese. It
Yeah.
is based off of Slender. It is
Yeah.
based off of old jump scare games. So it has a lot of creepypasta DNA in it. So it's
Yeah.
kind of befitting that we would bring up Five Nights at Freddy's.
I mean, well, but the full thing for Five Nights at Freddy's, it's supposed to be that it's creepy, like urban legends. Like people say that the kids were killed and stuffed into the suits, and that they're now haunting them, but we don't know if they're actually haunting them or if they're just malfunctioning.
Yeah. I guess another thing I'm gonna bring up before we wrap this up, because I'm almost out of things to complain about. Um, I guess the last thing I'll bring up is the spin-off characters, and by spin-off characters I mean knockoff
Jane the
characters.
Killer.
Jane the Killer, fucking Splendor Man, stuff like that. Even if it's a parody, it still isn't doing anything with what was already set up. It's just making
No.
another character just like it.
Yeah. It's fucking. It's dumb and pointless. Doesn't need to exist.
And I bet some people who are watching this are wondering, am I going to bring up SCPs? No, I'm not going to bring up SCPs because even
And
though
they're
they
kind
are
of
copy
different.
pastas, they're their own thing, and I want to do a whole separate video just for SCPs because SCPs, they're also ruined, but they're ruined for completely different reasons, and I want to do a whole video talking about why SCPs went to shit. So the SCP thing is a discussion for a completely different day, and it will be like a whole 30-minute to an hour long discussion. Because what
Yeah,
happened to
I'll.
SCPs is like a whole story. With creepypastas, it's like it was never that good to begin with, and it's just the more you added to it, the more faults showed. But with
Yeah.
SCPs, it's more of the community to blame than anything.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I guess you could say that with the creepypastas too.
No, no. With SCPs, like, it's moderation. Like, anybody can make
Oh,
a creepy
yeah.
pasta, but with SCP, like, you have to be on the SCP forum to be canon. You have to fucking do the appeals to become a real SCP. Like, and if your SCP is bad, or if they don't like you as an author anymore, they can delist your SCP and make it non-canon and replace it with a different story. The SCP thing is
Damn.
like its own fucking thing, and I'll do a whole video on that one day, talking about everything that went wrong with SCPs. But for right now, creepypastas.
Yeah.
Creepypastas were good when it was just short stories, one-off stories about monsters. And one day, I might do something like that where I write a fucking collection of short horror stories. But
I think that'd be a lot of fun, babe.
for right now, I think it's just best to fucking remember creepypastas. Just remember what came before us and remember when they were decent. Like the legacy of creepypastas right now is being a Friday Night Funkin' mod, and I think they deserve better. Also, I didn't bring up Been Drowned because that's an ARG, which I'm gonna do a whole video about ARGs as well. So it'll happen one day. The bin drown video will happen one day, just not today. So
But
yeah,
like,
is there anything you want to say about creepypastas?
uh, hmm. It's only really a handful of them that I like. Most of the time, they're not that great. Usually, it's it's more so that creepypastas tend to be poorly written or they're completely uncreative.
You know what? Before we wrap up the creepypasta thing, I want to bring up creepypasta YouTubers. That was my fucking
Oh,
childhood. That was my
yeah,
childhood.
same.
Mudahar,
Yeah.
my whole
He was the
aesthetic.
first one I watched that.
You can tell by my character that I'm inspired by creepypastas. You can tell by how I look and sound like that I'm inspired by creepypastas. Some ordinary gamers, Sticky Paddle, Creeps
Oh, fucking miss Sticky
McPasta,
Paddle.
all of those, haunted gaming, creepy gaming, all of them. Just fucking take a second
Yeah.
to pour one out for the boys who've moved on, the boys who fucking
Not,
left, the boys who got outed out as being pedophiles because of course it's YouTube. Pour
don't
one
pour
out
one
for
out for
all,
him.
pour one out for all of them except for them. Like pour one on them. Like it's a
This
dead
guy.
genre. It's a dead genre. It's something that everyone's moved on from, and now it's remembered
Yeah.
as nostalgia. And as I see more things being remembered as nostalgia that I grew up with, I'm just accepting how old I am.